Hello and welcome to episode 3 of Chel Squared. I'm your host, Andrew Chelney, and oh boy, do we have a lot to get into this week. So before I begin, we had an episode. We recorded it yesterday. Technical difficulties got in the way. It's all right. New episode today. Friday night, supposed to Thursday night. It happens. We move on. We have a lot to get into this week. We have John Tavares. We have the July 1st recap. We have Matt Martin. We have the whole Islanders debacle, because it really is a debacle. There's a lot going on. There's a lot to digest with the Islanders. It's not pretty. I'll spoil it right now. It's not pretty. We have the Ryan O'Reilly trade to talk about. We have Erik Karlsson. First of all, what is happening with Erik Karlsson? Because there are rumors going around that he's being traded, but there are rumors that he's not traded. There's a lot going on. With that. And we have Slava Voynov as well. I'm going to spoil this before we get into it later on in the show. Slava Voynov should never, ever, ever be allowed back in the National Hockey League. Ever. I'm going to spoil it for you before we even get into the topic. Slava Voynov, while he could be a decent defenseman for a team, I guess, the Kings still have his rights. There is zero situation, in which Slava Voynov should be employed by the National Hockey League. We will get into that. And also, Jack Johnson and John Tortorella. Jack Johnson, if you missed it, signed with the Pittsburgh Penguins, and there were some comments that he said right after he left, and John Tortorella, being John Tortorella, did not take those comments very lightly. We will get into all of that on this exciting edition of Chel Square. Joining me today, the fantastic, the magnificent feature columnist and news lead of the Hockey Writers, Brandon Share-Cohen. Brandon, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How you doing, Andrew?
I'm doing fantastic, man. Listen, this free agency is wild.
Yeah, it's one of the more I guess moving pieces one you'll see in recent years with trades, with just players signing elsewhere, with even mentioning, like you said, with Jack Johnson, just some of the aftermath. It's been pretty crazy.
Jack Johnson, by the way, an atrocious defenseman, 7th defenseman at best, getting a ludicrous contract, $3.5 million to a multi-year deal. It's wild. Pittsburgh usually does well with their free agency signings. That is a terrible deal. Top of the order, John Tavares signs a 7-year, $77 million trade with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Wow. Brendan, what do you think about that?
It's a lot of money. Probably not even as much as he could have made. And obviously, anytime a player leaves their own team in free agency is huge. When it's a big player like that, I should say, you never really see the stars go elsewhere. And going to Toronto, of all teams, is also a huge deal because, the Maple Leafs are what the Maple Leafs are to hockey. Both from a fan standpoint and a league standpoint, so that's huge anytime that happens. And there's backlash, right? Because the guy, quote unquote, turned his back on the Islanders, but at the same time, it's a business, and if they weren't doing what they had to do to keep him around, you can't really blame him for it.
Right. He was a Leafs fan growing up. You know what? As a hockey fan, you have to feel for Islanders fans, because it really was a roller coaster of emotions for Islanders fans. Because leading up to the draft, you hire Lou Lamoriello, you hire Barry Trotz. After Garth Snow and Doug Weight, those were immediate upgrades. But the draft was great for the Islanders. They had a phenomenal draft. It was looking as if they were on the upward trend. And then July 1st rolls around, and not only does John Tavares leave, they sign abysmal players to abysmal contracts. They signed Val Filppula to a 1-year deal, which isn't too bad, $2.75 million, a no move clause.
Yeah.
What? They signed Leo Komarov to a 4-year deal, $3 million per. That completely baffles me. He's not. First of all, he's not good. He's not a good hockey player. To sign him to a 4-year deal, that's a disgrace. You let Halak leave, which is fine, and you sign Robin Lehner, 1-year deal, $1.5 million. I guess it was an okay signing. Robin Lehner, I've mentioned this before on the show. Robin Lehner is not a starting goalie, so now you have Robin Lehner, who is a backup, and Thomas Greiss, who is also a backup. I guess doing dual starting time, splitting 41 games. I don't know how that's going to work. But, I mean, their lineup without John Tavares, their top line is okay. They have Anders Lee, they have Matt Barzal, who just won the Calder, and Jordan Eberle. It's a good first line. After that, Andrew Ladd, Brock Nelson, Josh Bailey. Talent kind of starts to trail off. Andrew Ladd has that awful contract. Brock Nelson's okay. Josh Bailey's okay. But then it goes off the deep end completely. You have Anthony Beauvillier, Val Filppula as your third line C. Disgrace. Josh Ho-Sang, Brendan, can you explain to me what in the world are the Islanders? First of all, what they did with Josh Ho-Sang and what they're gonna do with him, because in my opinion, they've been mistreating him, mishandling him since day one.
Yeah, that's the kind of player where he's kind of a polarizing figure, regardless of who you're talking to, whether it's been his time in junior, whether it's time now at the NHL or AHL. But he's 22 years old now. I mean, he was drafted 4 years ago.
Yeah,
it's crazy that he's only played in less than 50 games. And he has potential. He has a lot of talent. He probably has about as much skill, as anybody on the roster other than Barzal. But the fact that they can't use him properly it says a lot about the way the Islanders have been run the last couple of years. And it's not to take a shot at their coaching staff, which obviously wasn't great, but it seems across the board throughout his career, no one can use Ho-Sang properly. And you can bring up attitude issues or whatever it may be, but at some point, players with attitude issues can still perform, and you still got to use them. And obviously, he seemed to be willing to, adjust and make the corrections that are needed, and he's still barely getting any playing time. I mean, right now he's kind of penciled in on the third line role, but is he going to play this year? Who knows?
It's definitely a huge question mark for the Islanders. I mean, I don't know what is going on, but behind closed doors, we don't know what's going on, but it's definitely an issue at this point. He's getting to the point where if you're not going to play him this year, you have to move him. You have to get something for him before you completely ruin, one, his potential, and two, his trade value. The fourth line for the Islanders is projected to be Leo Komarov, Casey Cizikas, and Cal Clutterbuck. I mean, that's awful. You can't spin that any other way. That's just terrible. Their defensive pairings, you have Nick Leddy and Johnny Boychuk, which off the cut, Johnny Boychuk, he's Boychuk, but he's not the Bruins Boychuk anymore. Thomas Hickey, Ryan Pulock, and Sebastian Aho and Adam Pelech. I mean, realistically, besides maybe Nick Leddy, that's not really a good defensive anything. Calvin DeHaan just signed a 4-year deal in Carolina. What are they? What are they planning? What is the? If you're Lou Lamoriello, what's the plan? What are you looking ahead for? What are you gonna do?
So, just looking at their lines again, I think the way you projected it makes sense on paper. I think Beauvillier has to get a chance in the top 6 this year. And I think Komarov could then be used as kind of like a 13th forward or rotating fourth liner. But I think they really wanted to get Matt Martin back just to reunite that Casey Cizikas, Cal Clutterbuck line. which I mean at the time I thought they were really good. Very physical line. They were able to create energy. One of the better lines in the league for their role at the time. And again, that role and that the role of the fourth line has changed in recent years, and that's not what it is anymore. So I think having that fourth line of heavy hitters and kind of older guys who are like 27 to 30 years old, when most teams are going with players that are like 20 years old, 21 years old on their fourth line to try and get some speed and energy out there, it's not a good plan. I think Beauvillier is much better than people realize, and I think if you put him up with a top center, he could do better. I think the issue there is who do you have as a top center outside of Matthew Barzal? Brock Nelson is probably the most inconsistent player in the league. He'll start off the season with 15 goals, then he'll trail off and get like 5 the next 20 games, and then he might get another like 7 the rest of the way. So he'll finish with a decent goal amount, but it's just inconsistency that you can't have if you're going to win. Fantasy points and actual points are totally different things. So I don't know what the team's going to do. I think, like you said, the draft, them and the Detroit Red Wings had the most incredible draft I've seen in recent years, like top to bottom, where they had Wallstrom, Dobson, Wild. Skarek in the third round was a very good pick, and obviously Blake Jenkins in the fifth round, who could have been potentially, a first or second round pick. Just incredible draft value. But those players aren't helping you now. And you can say the same thing about a lot of the players they have coming up already with like Dal Call. He was fifth overall, and he still hasn't had a shot at the NHL.
Huge bust, by the way. What a terrible, terrible pick by the Islanders. I mean, I don't know anything about drafting. I'm not a scout, and I'm not a general manager of a hockey team. But I personally, I feel like we're in an era where at least in the top 5, maybe top 10, scouts should have a very clear idea as to who is going to be good in the NHL, because you cannot waste a top 5 pick, especially in today's. I mean, you couldn't waste it ever, but you especially can't waste it now. A top 5 pick is supposed to be your franchise player for the next 2 decades. To completely whiff on Del Call in the last 4 or 5, to completely whiff on a top 5 pick in the last 4 or 5 years, it's a huge black spot on the organization.
Yeah, and I mean, coming out of that draft class, I think it made sense that he was picked that high, just because, I mean, if you look at him, he's got size. He's 6'3", he's over 200 pounds. He's got, he had the scoring in spades in the OHL. And, I mean, he's got just the versatility that you want. The guy can play both wings. He's better on the left wing as well, but he can play the right if need be. He's got hands. He's got good vision. It's just something about maybe I don't want to say the work ethic, but just the motor. It just hasn't translated to the next level. And I mean, he's gotten a few games. I think it's been like 5 games or something at the NHL level, and he hasn't produced a point. And it's just at some point you have to, put him in a position to succeed, or just move him and cut ties. The issue with that, and the same thing with him and Hosang, is if you cut ties with them now, you're trading them for no value. You could say trade a player just to get rid of them, but what's the point in trading them if you're not going to get anything back for them?
You're absolutely right. Michael Del Call was drafted 5th overall by the Islanders in 2014. I mean, it's at this point, he's 22, just turned 22 a couple weeks ago. It's at this point, I mean, he played a couple of games for the Islanders this season. You have to figure he has to play. He has to play this year. It's because if he doesn't, then it's over basically.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know where he's going to play in that lineup. I don't think anyone on the lineup, other than, say, Barzal and Lee and Eberle, obviously, no one of the forward group should be safe in their role. I think everyone should be able to be pushed around and out of the lineup. So Valtteri Filppula, he might be the third-line center to start the year. There's no guarantees that he's going to be the third-line center all year long. Same for, Brock Nelson. Is he going to be traded? Is that, are they making room for that? Another player there. Andrew Ladd going to the third line, Beauvillier going to the second line, that's fine, but then there's no room for Del Call in the top 6 or the top 9. So it's just, and then again, you add in Matt Martin to the equation, and then you have Komarov, who you just signed. I don't really understand the signings. I don't think that's going to fit their team at all, given what they need. And I also don't understand how they're going to fit their prospects that are ready to make the jump.
The Matt Martin deal, I mean, the Islanders gave up nothing for him, according to Islanders fans that know their prospects better than I do. McAdam is a pretty much a bust goalie at this point. So it was a fairly, the Islanders didn't give up much for Matt Martin. At the same time, Matt Martin has a $2.5 million contract until
That's the issue.
2020. And not only that, I get Matt Martin's obsession with the Islanders. I get that. At the same time, you just gave Toronto $2.5 million of cap space for nothing. They didn't give the Islanders a 6th-round pick. They didn't give them a prospect in return. It was straight up Matt Martin for a C prospect. I don't I It baffles me how Lou Lamoriello, who's been around the block, can do trades like this at this point in his career, and at this point in the Islanders, 2018-2019 season. The season hasn't even started yet. I have them as one of the worst teams, probably maybe even the worst team for the upcoming season.
I don't have them as like the worst team. I think they might even be outside the bottom 5, but obviously anything can happen with the way that lineup looks. But Lamoriello obviously liked Martin as a player. Brought him with. I think he's the one that signed him in Toronto, and obviously he traded to get him now. So certain GMs, especially old school GMs, kind of have that affinity for keeping the players they like. I just don't get how you can look at that player and say, this is the kind of guy I want in this team. Nothing against Matt Martin, but the cap hit isn't good. You're clearing up space within your own conference, which, again, it could be a favor to Toronto, which isn't smart to do at this point. And you're also taking on a player that just doesn't fit in what you want. Like, why would you sign Komarov then? And what you already... I don't know. It just doesn't make sense to me.
It doesn't make any sense. The Islanders have... I tweeted this the other day, but I want to reiterate it for effect here because it's very important. The Islanders have... They have a ton of cap space. But at the same time, the Islanders have 34-year-old Johnny Boychuk signed at $6 million until 2022. 32-year-old Andrew Ladd signed at $5.5 million until 2024. 30-year-old Cal Clutterbuck signed at $3.5 million until 2022. Now 31-year-old Leo Komarov signed at $3 million until 2022. You have 27-year-old Casey Cizikas, who's a 4th-line, 3rd-line role, bottom 6 guy, signed at $3.35 million until 2021. And now you also have Matt Martin at $2.5 million until 2020. So that's a total of $23.85 million locked up in role playing and bottom pairing guys, which, by the way, could have bought you more than 2 of John Tavares' contracts.
You also have Josh Bailey, who obviously isn't a role player, but also I wouldn't say that Boychuk's a role player. Bailey is incredible. Obviously, he had 71 points last season, career year. But I think having him locked up for the length of his deal, we're not sure if Bailey is this player or if it's kind of an anomaly. He's done better. Like the last 3 years, he's gotten better each year, but you still don't know. And he's going to be 29 at the beginning of the season, right? So you've got to factor that in. He's already going to be 29. He's locked up until 2023, 24 for $5 million a year. That's rough.
Yeah, I mean, for Bailey, I kind of gave him a pass. I didn't mention him on that list for a reason, because he scores, because he's at least, producing something. But right. Boychuk, Ladd, Komarov, Clutterbuck, I mean, these are names that you absolutely, 1, can't have long term, 2, at these ludicrous contracts. But if you look around the league on July 1st, there are teams that did really well in free agency. John Karlsson re-signed with the Capitals. James Van Riemsdyk went back to Philadelphia for a 5-year deal at $35 million, $7 million per. I mean, I guess now the Flyers won the Shed for JVR trade, right?
Yeah, I think so.
He's gonna look good in a Flyers uniform again. I think he's gonna do very well with Giroux, with maybe a sophomore Nolan Patrick. But where are you going to fit Wayne Simmons now? Because he was still very good in the power play last year. 5-on-5, not so much. Do you keep him? Do you trade him? What do you think they do?
Well, we're talking now about players that are a bit older that could sign a huge contract. So obviously, teams don't seem to have gotten the memo that it's not a smart idea to do so. So I think a guy like Wayne Simmons, I mean, he's still got a ton of value. Teams will look at him, and there's a lot to like about him. Obviously, the way he plays the game, physicality, can score, as well as anybody else in the league. Just your typical power forward. Like you said, 5-on-5 might not be as good as it once was, but I think it's fair to say that he's probably better than he was last year. And it could, I mean, I don't want to say fair to say. We don't know if he's anything, if that was an anomaly or if that's the new rule. But if it's the exception to the rule, some team's going to take a chance just to see. So I think he has to be traded. But no, just across the board, like you're saying with the contracts, some were really good. Some were very affordable. Some not so great. You got Chicago signing a goalie who really hasn't done anything in his career other than win a Stanley Cup. What seems like 20 years ago with a full no movement clause. That's awful. Signing Cam Ward, I'm talking about.
1 year
You got
deal could be worse, but again, there's zero reason to do that to a 1 year deal.
exactly, and also they've had success in recent years. Not including last year. They've had success having goalies that are kind of unproven, that are kind of just like looking to make their mark in the league.
Jeff
And
Glass, by the way, Vezina winner in my mind.
um, then you've got some deals like Vancouver. I don't really know what Vancouver was doing on free agents. I'll fully admit that when Jim Benning was still with the Bruins, I wanted him to be the next GM of the team, and I was really bummed out when he left. And I'll say the same thing about Jeff Gorton when he was still with the Bruins way back, or when he was with the Rangers, and then before he actually got promoted to GM, I kind of wanted the Bruins to hire him. I'm kind of glad that we ended up, seeing Don Sweeney take over the role in Boston. But you look at Jim Benning in Vancouver, and I'm really glad that he didn't get the job in Boston because he signed Antoine Roussel 4 years, $13 million, and Jay Beagle 4 years, $12 million.
What a mess.
Those might be the worst contracts I've ever seen.
What a mess. You can't.
Outside the Carey Price contract, that contract's the worst contract I've ever seen.
Okay. Carey Price deserves a trophy. Not a trophy. Well, he does deserve a trophy. He deserves a statue. He deserves his own country. He deserves his face on Canadian currency. Carey Price is Carey Price. He's
Right.
one of the best goalies in the world and in the history of the league. Now, that being said, he did struggle last year. That's not a secret. At the same time, he's still Carey Price. He's also not super old. He's still. I'm very confident in his ability to bounce back. But I mean, the Canadiens. We talked about this last week. But I mean, they traded a 30-goal scorer in their best center to Arizona for a guy, Max Domi, who scored 9 goals, 4 of which were empty netters. I don't. And they're looking for centers. By the way, the Ryan O'Reilly trade. I want your take on it first, because I have a scorching take, but I need to hear what you think about it before I get into what I have to say about it.
Okay, so first thing about the Carey Price. I
Yeah.
had an issue with it before he had a down season. I think you're signing a goalie whose contract's going to kick in when he's 31 years old to a contract that's 8 years long, worth $10.5 million a season with a full no movement clause, retroactive included the last year of his contract and the full 8 years after. That's the most atrocious thing I've ever seen in professional sports, outside of maybe certain contracts in like basketball, which are stupid. But
The cap
Carey
is
Price,
huge in
no one's
basketball.
saying. Yeah, but I mean, some player, the highest paid player in the NHL is equivalent to like the 50th highest paid player in the NBA,
But the
right?
caps are different.
No, for sure. It's also a smaller roster,
Right.
but it's just crazy some of the role players that'll get the money, regardless of the cap. But Carey Price, he's a good goalie. Obviously, he's one of the best goalies in the world, but that contract, you can't justify it. I can't justify it, at least. There's no way. But my take on the O'Reilly trade,
Yeah.
I think St. Louis won by a lot, to be honest.
That's interesting.
I think Tage Thompson is decent. I think he's going to be an okay player. I think dumping the salary they were able to dump is a huge, huge, huge win, while also getting that center and the win now kind of situation. I think trading away a first round pick, ideally that first round pick is a low first round pick, which then at that point, what's the difference between pick 20 and pick 50? The percentage isn't that different or isn't that far off when you talk about hitting on the prospect. It's not great, but it's not going to get much better if you go higher up to the 20s. I think Buffalo got a good value considering the timeline they were on. They didn't pay the bonus. That's huge. Not that, the Pujols can't afford that, but I think not paying it, if you're going to really try and be on a deadline to get out of that entirely, it's as good a deal as you're going to see. Buffalo got some very good role players. I'm not going to say that Sabotka's not a good role player. I'm not going to say that Berglund's not a good role player. I think their contracts are way out of proportion with what they can do. And I think O'Reilly's a legitimate, 1A, 1B center. I don't think he's like on the same level as a Kopitar or a Bergeron two-way, but I think he's about that same kind of player. I think he's as good as Jonathan Toews, in my opinion, as an actual hockey player.
Well, Jonathan Toews needs to actually play, relative to his contract, because that contract is a disgrace. He hasn't earned it, but besides the point, I think the Blues and the Sabres both lost the Ryan O'Reilly trade, but in different ways. The Blues traded Vladimir Sobotka, Patrick Berglund, and a promising prospect in Tage Thompson, a first-round pick in 2019, and a second in 2021 for a guy who capped out at 64 points in 2013-14 with the Avalanche. Now, before I go on, I just want to make this clear. I love Ryan O'Reilly's game. Completely. I love the guy. I think he's going to be fantastic in St. Louis. I absolutely adore him as a first-line center. But just keep that. But 64-point cap. Just keep that at the back of your head. Here's the thing. Berglund scored 26 points in 57 games last year. Decent, two-way guy, depth guy, expendable, fine, sure, cool. Sobotka, another expendable player, 11 goals, 31 points this season in 82 full games. So 11 goals, by the way, his career high. Never scored more than 11 goals prior to this year. 11 career high. On top of that, you trade a first-round pick in 2019, a second-round pick in 2021, and Tage Thompson. Now, in terms of roster players, I think St. Louis won by a mile, but I don't necessarily like the giving up of Tage Thompson. He's played 41 NHL games. He's only got 9 points, but I'm older than him. I'm 21 years old. He is 7 months younger than I am. I'm sad about that. I need to buy like a tub of ice cream and eat that in sadness, because he's in the NHL. I'm not. Anyway, but you give up him and two high prospects. I mean, St. Louis was in this quasi rebuild. Maybe we're tanking, maybe we're not. At the deadline last season, they gave up Stastny to Winnipeg, who did fantastically in Winnipeg. I don't know why he would leave Winnipeg for Vegas. Kind of did the Kevin Durant thing. If you can't beat him, join him. But whatever, that's beside the point.
I'll say with Stastny too, I think he may have taken less to go to Vegas.
He did.
I think he left money on the table.
Yeah.
So he really wanted to go to Vegas instead of staying in Winnipeg. That kind of shocks me, considering I don't think Stastny's that good. Hot take, but
that's a scorcher. Not gonna lie, that's a little bit of a scorcher.
I don't think he's bad. I just don't think he's good as people say. Like, I think he's closer to a 2-3 than a 1-2.
Might be a scorcher, but I mean, the Ryan O'Reilly trade makes St. Louis's top six now, especially with the addition of Tyler Bozak. Their top six is incredible. They have Jaden Schwartz, Braden Shen, of course Vladimir Tarasenko, now Tyler Bozak, Ryan O'Reilly, and Alex Steen. That is a solid, absolute great top six. Their bottom six, with now David Perron again back in St. Louis for the third time. With Robbie Fabry, you got Yashkin still there, and their defense is good. They have Edmondson, Pietrangelo, Parayko, and their goalie situation, I don't necessarily trust Jake Allen to carry the Blues to the final. I mean, he had a .906 save percentage last year in 59 games. That's not good enough no matter who you play for. A .906 is not good. Now for the Sabres, Tage Thompson could be great playing with Eichel, but what are they going to do with Berglund and Sobotka? Because they don't solve any of their issues. First of all, before they even entertain the possibility of being a competitive hockey team, they need a goalie.
Yeah.
Their goalie situation is abysmal, and before they even begin to think about wins, they need someone to stop the puck. Carter Hutton is 32 years old, and it's fine and dandy. Carter Hutton is not going to win you enough games to carry you to the playoffs. That's not going to happen. So you get Berglund Saboka, cool. You know, depth scoring, which the Sabres need because they don't really have any of that. But now what? You know, if they're not thinking about immediately shipping them off to somewhere, or playing them, seeing where they are, and then shipping them out as a rental to at the deadline, I can't foresee a situation in which Berglund and Saboka, both of them, at the very least, both of them are still in St. Louis by the end of next year. Now, I think two huge winners. Now, I mentioned this. I tweeted this out yesterday, and over 160 people and over 160 votes came into the poll. Who was the biggest loser in the Ryan O'Reilly trade? Now, it was the Sabres, Blues, Islanders, Canadiens. 10% said the Sabres. 23% said the Blues. 52% said the Islanders. 15% said the Canadiens. I think the Islanders were probably the biggest loser in this because they lost John Tavares and they didn't get a 1C back. Ryan O'Reilly could have been that 1C for him. Same goes for Montreal, who were also rumored to be in the Ryan O'Reilly hunt. They traded their crystal clear first line center in Alex Galchenyuk to a winger who scored 9 goals last year, 4 of which empty netters, and they're still desperately in the hunt for a center. Islanders are going to be putrid. Habs are going to be putrid. Sabres are going to be putrid. The biggest question is going to be the Blues, who got a lot better as of July 6th, right? They got a lot better, but the biggest question now is Jake Allen. Because if they're not in Stanley Cup win now mode, it's gonna be bad for them.
Yeah, I mean, just going to what you said with Buffalo first, I'll tackle that first. Getting Saboka and Berglund as depth players, I think they both will stay in Buffalo just because, one, it's going to be really hard to move them, and two, I mean, especially Saboka, I should say, because I've never really liked Saboka, even when he was a Bruin. I thought his game was a little overrated. Not bad, just a bit overrated. They needed the depth. They really needed the depth. I mean, they need people all over the lineup, top of the lineup, bottom of the lineup, defense, goaltending, like you said. They have a lot of really, really good prospects, like prospects I'm very high on that are going to be coming up. But for now, they needed that kind of depth player role filled out. I think for the Blues, they look like a much better team, like you said. I think Bozak, he could be their second line player. I think he's going to be their third line center with Ryan O'Reilly playing second line center. And then you have Robert Thomas, if he makes the team. Is he playing center right away, or is he going to be playing on the wing in a top 6 role? Because if you have him as the top 6 left winger behind Jaden Schwartz, so second line player on the wing instead of a center, that's a very good way for him to learn the game without having to, I guess, take on the tough role that comes with being a two-way center at the NHL level. I think he's smart enough to be a number 1 center one day, and I think playing with O'Reilly helps them in that regard. So I think the Blues are the major winners of the trade. I think the Canadiens are the biggest losers, but I think at the same time, how could they possibly have made this trade happen? Because they don't have the players that would have gone out in terms of cap space to fill it out. They don't have the top-end prospect. I mean, you're not trading Kotkaniemi. I don't really know who else would even be on par with Tage Thompson. I said he's decent before. I think he's a good prospect. I think he had a rough first season, but I think when you have his size, his skill, and you're playing for a team that didn't really get to use you in a great role, I think Thompson got the short end of the stick here, but now he might get a chance to really shine in Buffalo. No one in Montreal's prospect pool really even comes close to that in terms of a Tage Thompson level player. And also, but at the same time, you also can't really move a first round pick in a deal like this, because is that first round pick going to be a top 5, top 10 pick? You have to think about it that way. The Blues are able to move the first round pick because they know that in their mind, it's hopefully going to be a bottom 10 pick, like I said, or a bottom 11 pick. For the Canadiens, you can't really take that risk. the same way the Senators probably shouldn't be trading away their first round pick in 2019, except it's already been traded.
What a terrible trade. Jesus.
What a terrible trade.
What an awful, abysmal trade by the Senators, which, I mean, the Senators right now are complete tire fire. Karlsson was supposed to be moved last night. There were tweets by people that are knowledgeable in the business that he is either about to be moved or was moved, and then he wasn't moved, and then there's a whole lot to that. But a quick note on David Perron, by the way. David Perron has only ever signed contracts with the St. Louis Blues. He has played four. He played for the Blues for a few years in the beginning because he was drafted by them. Then he got traded to the Edmonton Oilers, traded to Pittsburgh, traded to Anaheim, then re-signed with the Blues in 2016-2017, then got picked up in expansion by the Vegas Golden Knights, and now he's signing again with the St. Louis Blues. So he's only ever signed contracts, only put his name on the X with the St. Louis Blues. But that's just, little tidbit of information.
That's a fun fact. I just verified that's true. That's a very fun fact.
Are you doubting my facts, Brendan?
No, I just wanted to see it as you were explaining it, and I'm just adding as a second kind of.
Brendan Share-Cohen, doubter of facts.
I doubt all facts. Fake news.
Oof. Doubter of the Golden Knights, by the way, are an interesting team now because they got Paul Stastny. They lost David Perron, and they lost James Neal to Calgary. I mean, his contract might be... He's 30 years old. Calgary gave him a 5-year, $28.75 million contract. I mean, it's James Neal might be a little much.
I think Calgary was desperate. They're in a situation where they're kind of in the middling stage where they are good, but they're not good enough to win. With James Neal, I still don't think they're good enough to win, but you needed that right winger who can score. So why not get one for zero assets on the free agency market? It's not the worst deal in the world. Obviously, hindsight's 2020. We could be saying in 3 years, wow, this contract is the worst contract in the league. But on paper, I don't think it's that bad. But I think with Vegas, I'm interested to see what Karlsson's going to get. William Karlsson, that is. That contract could be, very, very team friendly if they play their cards right. Or his agent could, say, hey, give me a 2-year bridge deal. Let me prove that I can do what I'm doing, and then I'm going to sign a huge contract when I'm 27. But I think they're going to try and sign to probably 5-6 years, and a reasonable cap hit. The issue is he's 25 already, so he's going to be giving up RFA years no matter what. So that's an interesting situation. I think their team. I don't want to say that they're going to be worse next year because you can't at this point. They're going to be good. They're going to be bad. I'm not saying anything. They can win the Stanley Cup and they can finish first in the draft lottery, and I won't be surprised. I'm withholding all judgment. I have no idea what to expect from them.
If you don't want to say it, I'll say it for you. The Golden Knights, not only are they not going to make the Cup final again, they're not going to make the playoffs. They're a bad team that got. I think they just got super lucky. Now this might be an extreme hot take, and it is because they made the final, right? So they have to be good in a sense, right? But everything went right for them. Every single thing went right. And that is the only way Vegas could have made the final, because Fleury was out for a chunk of the season, and they had, 5th and 6th string goaltenders playing like Marty Brodeur in his prime. That is luck. You can't have... If they struggled even a little bit, Vegas drops, their confidence drops, their play drops, they lose that extra game that they didn't need to lose, that they didn't want to lose. We could be talking about a completely different, not only final, but playoff situation. Everything had to go crystal clear, pristine for the Vegas Golden Knights in their first season in order to get to where they were. And it did. So now we have the second-year team. I doubted them from the beginning, and they made the Cup final, but everything went right. I can't foresee a situation in which everything goes right again and they make a cup run again. I cannot foresee a situation in which that happens.
I think their team plays a really good game. It's a good system for what they have in terms of their team. I think their roster still is very underwhelming. Top down, there's some good pieces. Marshall Stowe is obviously, very good. William Karlsson was unreal last year. I think he's going to be kind of closer to what he was last year than he was before, in years prior. Thomas Tatar was not worth anything close to what was traded for him. Stastny, like I
What a
said,
terrible deal. Again,
yeah,
what a terrible deal.
I think they had the resources to be able to make a deal like that, but yeah, I did not like it. Stastny, like I said, in my mind, overrated, very overrated. Riley Smith, every second year he performs poorly, so this year he should do poorly. I mean, who knows? The guy's got all the talent in the world. Just for some reason he can't keep it together every single year. I just don't see the talent top to bottom that says, yeah, this is a Stanley Cup team. Braden McNabb, good, not great defenseman. Nate Schmidt, I think, is actually a really good defenseman. Nick Holden, I can tell you, and you can say as well, New York and Boston, we both have seen him.
Nick Holden
He's
is
okay.
a disgrace, by
He's
the
okay.
way. He's a disgrace.
Sixth defenseman.
He's atrocious. I've never met Nick Holden. I'm sure he's a phenomenal human being. As a hockey player, disgrace. Continue.
Derek England, not bad, not great. Again, I mean, that's also like being, living in Vegas and the leadership thing. I'm fine with that. John Merrill, fine. Colin Miller, I really, really like. I wanted him in Boston before he was traded to Boston. And then losing him was kind of a rough situation, but I understand it. And he had a breakout year last year. He's good. I would say closer to a 4 than a 2. And Shea Theodore, I think, it can be a legitimate top pairing defenseman. So I said 2 players that could potentially be top 4 options that are like legitimately young. The other options are like, again, Schmidt and McNabb. They're good, but they're not great. So you don't have, like, for example, Calgary has a legitimate, like, just powerhouse top 4. You said St. Louis, 3 very good defenders. Nashville, some very good defenders. Carolina is ridiculous. They're going to have to trade some players. I don't see Vegas having the defense that other teams have. Their goaltending, Marc-Andre Fleury is good. I think last year was kind of the same boat for him where he like rode the high of everybody else. He kind of looked like himself again in the final versus what he looked like early in the playoffs. Malcolm Subban, still not sold on him. I'll need to see him actually play a consistent role to be good in my mind. Again, I just don't see Vegas being as good as they were last year, but I also am not going to count them out until I see like everything that happens next year, because they've made me wrong once, and I'm not going to let them do it again. I refuse to let them do it again.
Well, the Golden Knights were linked to Erik Karlsson as early as the trade deadline, and they're still linked to him as, today probably. But
Yeah.
Erik Karlsson was supposed to be moved to the Lightning last night. It didn't happen. Now, the question that I want to ask you is what kind of... Because, first of all, if the Lightning want Karlsson, they need to dump Callahan and probably a prospect to a team like the Rangers, the Islanders, maybe the Devils. They need to dump big contracts to get a guy like Karlsson to make room for him. Now, even let's forget about that for a second. Let's forget about team number 3 and what that entails. What would a fair trade for Erik Karlsson be if you're Steve Yzerman and if you're Melnick and Pierre Dorian? Because Erik Karlsson is a generational talent. The Ottawa Senators will never see a talent like that again. He's probably their best player in franchise history, which is saying a lot because they had Alfredsson, they had Spezza, they had Heatley in his prime. They had Yashin, I guess, for a little bit.
They had Chara.
Yeah. So
I mean, he did more else outside of Ottawa, obviously, but
right. They had Wade Redden, they had Chara, they had Chris Phillips for his entire career. They have a lot of great names. Erik Karlsson is by far their best player ever. What is a fair trade for both teams in this situation if you're Tampa Bay?
Oh, if I'm Tampa Bay. I mean,
Yeah.
if I'm Tampa Bay, I'm getting Karlsson, and I'm trying not to trade away Kachuk or Radish. Those are two players that I really don't want to move. Uh, Cal Foot, I also don't want to move, but if I have to, he's going to be gone way before I'm going to be trading away Kachuk or Radish, like I said. I don't think Mitchell Stevens is the same kind of level of talent. I think he's going to be a very good player. I just don't think he's going to be the main piece of a trade involving Erik Karlsson. Because, like you said, Erik Karlsson is. I always say, everyone talks about Crosby and McDavid and whatever you want to talk about, and it's true, they're the best in the world. How can you say that Erik Karlsson isn't in that discussion? You know?
You're
And
right. You're absolutely right.
what scares me about Tampa Bay is this is a little side note. If they can get Carlson and they also have Hedman, that's in my mind the number one and number two defenseman on the planet.
Let's
How do
say
you how do
right.
you get through that?
Let's
Because you also have
say
McDonough.
let's say they get rid of Dan Girardi, which I have watched more than I should have of terrible defenseman. Probably a great human being, but not a good player. Let's say they get Carlson without touching the current defensive pairing, right? So you have Victor Hedman and Erik Karlsson. You have Ryan McDonough and Anton Strawman. And you have Coburn, who is he's a six guy, I guess. Fine, sure. And Mikhail Sergachev. That is you couldn't make a better top six in NHL 18 without with salary cap turned off if you tried.
Yeah, I think that's why Sergachev would have to be involved in the trade because they don't want to move Kachuk, they don't want to move Radish. Uh, Cal Foot, like I said, you don't want to move him, but at that point, you could hopefully draft another defender, hopefully higher than 19th overall at some point in the future, or not 19th overall, sorry, but you know what I mean. I think if you're Ottawa, you definitely want to get Sergachev in the trade. I think you don't want to take on cap, so I mean, there's going to be has to be a third team, like you said, and that team's going to have to take on potentially a Callahan, potentially a Girardi, who that signing made no sense to me. He has a no trade clause, so that could be a big part of it as well. If the Rangers are the team that come in and take on that salary, if they get Callahan and Girardi back, I don't even know what to think about that.
I mean, they would win the Marty St. Louis trade, that's for sure. They won it before. They won it when it happened. But they'll absolutely win it now.
That trade was interesting to me at the time too, but it's a different story for a different day. I think they won as well.
I mean, speaking of defensemen, Slava Voynov, who deported himself after a gruesome scene, uh, there is zero, zero chance Slava Voynov should be in the NHL ever again, ever. He's probably still a top four defenseman. Is speaking purely hockey. Probably a top four defenseman. Probably could be used by a lot of teams. There is no conceivable possibility that Voynov, because the Kings still have his rights for I think at least the next year. So there's zero chance that a team could inquire about Voynov, trade for Voynov if the Kings play Voynov, that there's going to be good PR out of that. It's going to be a dumpster fire if Voynov, wherever Voynov plays, if he plays, which he shouldn't, by the way, to all 31 GMs in the National Hockey League, soon to be 32 probably with Seattle. I mean, that's likely going to be the destination for team number 32. To all the general managers in the National Hockey League, Slava Voynov should never be employed by any of you. What do you think about that?
Just a garbage human being, and it's not an isolated incident. This has happened more than once, by all accounts. It's not like he just. I mean, any kind of domestic violence is not. There should be zero tolerance for it. But when you hear like what happened and you read about like what actually happened and what transpired that day, this person just shouldn't. I mean, he shouldn't. Like, not only should he not have a job in the NHL, he should probably be in prison for a long time. So I have no idea. I understand that I could probably play 24, 25 minutes a night in the NHL and be a really good top four defenseman. I just don't see how that matters. I think I tweeted something back a couple weeks ago along the lines of, even if he gave me, Bobby Orr level of talent, I still wouldn't want anything to do with him because there's just no excuse for it. That's just a bad human being. It's a person that doesn't deserve a second chance, especially when you know that like he hasn't learned his lesson. He's made jokes about it. Like, oh, it's a good thing I wasn't in the NHL last year. I got to win a gold medal. That's great. I'm glad that this is the lesson you took away from, the situation at hand, the one where you brutally beat somebody to the point, probably within like inches of their life.
No, I mean you're totally right. There's Voynov treated the situation first of all, I mean, let's be clear here. He never should have been a part of this in the first place. And the way that he treated the situation after he did what he did was a disgrace, complete disgrace. And it's been well documented. It's some of Voynov should never be in the NHL ever again. Now this was brought up to me by Chris Howard, who does the Obstructed Views podcast. He's at Chris Howard on Twitter. He brought this up to me, and I want to ask you this: if the Kings trade Voynov, how does that look for the Kings?
I think it looks fine for the Kings. I think the Kings probably just want to get out of the contract, and they probably, not the contract, but the situation, get him out of their hair, and they get an asset back for it. That's fine. I have no issue with that. I think it's a little rough when you think of like they're kind of facilitating his entry back into the league, where they can just say with an iron fist, no, you're never going to play again. But I think if they can get a decent asset back for it, that's fine. I think the real issue it comes from whatever team wants to send out any kind of asset to potentially reinstate Voynov into the league. That's the real disgrace. Again, when I say I have no issue with LA doing it, I see where there would be an issue, but I think the issue really comes down to, why would a team want to bring him back in? If LA gets rid of him, it means they don't want him in the league. But they are also smart enough to get something back for him. If some team trades, let's say, I don't know what team would even be interested in him. Let's say just randomly Minnesota. Nothing against Minnesota. I'm just saying, let's say the Wild decide we're going to trade away, a B-level prospect, or I don't know, a mid-round pick. Obviously, they want to get Voynov back into the league, so they're willing to do something to do it. That's with the team that I have an issue with, because not only is he a disgrace to hockey players, he's a disgrace to human beings.
That take is absolutely on point. I mean, you're totally right. It's the only way the Kings could look bad is if they reinstated Voynov and let him play for them again, because they could spin it in basically any way they can, basically any way they want, right? Because if they keep him but they don't play him, right, they can argue, oh, we're keeping him but we're not going to play him because we want him to rot. We don't want him playing the NHL period, and all that, and that's good for them. But if they trade him, they can also spin it to say, oh, we don't want him a part of the organization. This is this is not acceptable behavior. We're distancing ourselves from him, and all of that. So the only way the Kings look bad is if he stays an LA King and is on LA Kings ice next season, for sure.
I think either way, no matter what they do, people will find a way to complain about anything. That's just the world we live in, which is fine. You can't please everybody all the time. I think getting out of the situation would be great. Let's say it was the Bruins, for example, the team that I follow the closest, and I don't want to speak for you, but let's say it was the Rangers for you. If I'm watching these two teams and they have the rights to the guy like Slava Voynov, I want them gone. I don't want them anywhere to the team. I don't want to have to deal with that circus. I don't want to see that on my news feed constantly. I don't want it to be a constant story. Every time you see Slava Voynov, you see, the LA Kings. It's always going to be there. I don't want that. I don't, as a fan and as a team. That's just bad press. That's bad publicity. I want to separate myself from that as much as I can. So I think, whatever I mean, they're going to trade him. they're definitely going to trade him if there's interest. If there is interest and they don't trade him, I'll be shocked. If there's no interest and they don't trade him, then that's something else entirely. And obviously, that's the ideal situation. I don't know. It's just a really rough situation. I have no idea how the guy's allowed back in the United States. You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
I want to move to the United States and I want to be, work there, and it's going to be a very, very uphill battle because it's just immigration is difficult, right? Being from Canada and not being an American. This guy is,
You've
probably
also you
closer.
also haven't committed domestic assault.
That's my point. This guy is a felon, you know, or as close to a felon as you can get. I don't want to speak on the legal terms of it because I haven't been keeping up with it. Law is my passion for what it's worth, but I haven't been keeping up with it outside of the NHL because it's just something that sickens me. I was just glad he was gone, and I'm shocked he's back. But I think, I mean, there's no excuse for him being a United States resident, let alone someone who's going to be making millions of dollars in the NHL.
That's a brilliant take. You're absolutely right. It's terrible that we have to even talk about this because he shouldn't be talked about. This shouldn't be an issue. He outright should be banned from the league, and that's that. But apparently, it's not that clear. It's just not how this is gonna go down, and it's gonna be really bad for not only whatever team decides to take him, but for the NHL as a whole to keep that kind of person employed. I mean, it's not good. Not good.
No, definitely not.
I mean, speaking in terms of legally, you got a player like Jack Johnson who was he faced bankruptcy. He was bankrupt because of his parents. He
What a rough situation.
yeah, for sure. He finally now, to my knowledge, now finally has his bearings again. But right after he left Columbus and signed this ridiculous contract with Pittsburgh, he said, and I quote, "I've been looking to be in a winning culture," unquote. Now, John Tortorella, being Torts that we all know and love very well, basically went on this rant and destroyed Jack Johnson, saying, all we've been doing is we were all very supportive of you. We've done nothing but help you through your financial situation, on ice performance and all of that. All we've been doing is trying to help you be better. And you go ahead and you say that, he cursed at him. It was rough. And then Jack Johnson basically backpedaled and he was like, "Oh, I didn't mean it. You know what I mean. The Penguins just won the Stanley Cup, and I want to be a." He backpedaled hard because of that, and GM Rutherford didn't had nothing to say about it. But I mean, that's the Penguins lost by signing Jack Johnson. I absolutely agree with John Tortorella here.
John Tortorella had every right to speak out. And I mean, first of all, his coaching style shouldn't be questioned by another team's GM. I think that the Blue Jackets are a really good upcoming team, and they're only going to get better. And I think the Penguins obviously are one of the best teams in the league, and they have been for the last 3 years. I mean, they have been consistently for the last over a decade, but last 3 years, obviously, they've won the Cup twice. But at the same time, how can you make a comment like that? I understand a player is going to make a comment, however they're going to make it. I want to be part of a winning culture. What's he going to say? Yeah, happy to be here. He kind of wants to make it personal, but at the same time, the word choice was rough because, I mean, you're just really slapping your own old team in the face. I think this whole thing has been kind of blown out of proportion with, it's the off season and it's some drama and it's a division rival and it's a player who, while you and I might know that he's not a very good defender, the rest of the hockey world, the uninformed fan, the casual fan, will look at Jack Johnson and they'll hear people like Don Cherry, they'll hear people like I don't know, you know what I'm talking about. The people that are old school
Right.
mentality, they'll say, wow, like Carl Elsner and Jack Johnson, these players, they're top four defenders. They play every game. They're rugged. They're physical.
Hashtag grit.
Hashtag
Hashtag
grit.
grit.
So when you talk about that, they're gonna say, "Oh yeah, this is a huge news because it's Jack Johnson." The last time Jack Johnson was relevant, and this isn't to be insulting to him, but the last time he was really relevant was when he was traded for Jeff Carter.
Yep.
You know, that trade was a huge win for LA in my mind.
You absolutely hit the nail on the head. Brendan, as always, this was a blast. Share where the person listening to this could keep up with you and keep up with your content.
Okay, so on Twitter at Share-Cohen, thehockeywriters.com. You can just look up my name; it'll be there. The Troubles of Bruin podcast, at TAB Pod on Twitter, and yeah, that should cover it.
This was a ton of fun talking hockey with you, and we will do this again very soon. But thank you so much for coming on board and for giving me your hot takes.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
All right, and that was Chel Squared, and I will talk to you again next week.